Welcome to Rise Up in Business, the law podcast for small business owners. This podcast is designed to share important legal information without the stuffy legal jargon. I'm Tracy Milacrane. Let's get into today's episode. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Rise Up in Business podcast. I am loving the conversations I'm having at this time of year around the freshness of our business journey, the renewed perspective and outlook that we have, and the energy that so many people bring at this time of year to talking all things business development, clients, up-leveling, the client journey, growth. I love all of it. One of the most important conversations I seem to be having around this time of year relates to aligned clients, magnetizing more aligned clients in business, niching even further, and then, by extension, letting some clients go. Letting clients go that aren't aligned to make space for more clients who are. And sometimes this comes about because of a business owner's growth or because of an evolution or a new direction a business is taking. But sometimes it comes about because this time of year sees some more spaciousness where business owners have time to think, have time to plan, have time to think about what their ideal journey looks like or what their most beautifully aligned clients look like. For whatever the reason may be, it is a conversation that I'm having more and more often at this time of year. I know from talking to so many of my beautiful clients that letting someone go can be really unpleasant. When they've made a decision, Tracy, it's time to let someone go. It's time to part ways with this client. Oh, I've got that sinking stomach feeling and I don't want to do it. I don't want to have the conversation, but I know how great I'll feel once we've had it and once it's done. I hear you. I get it. I really do. I want to dive in today's episode and share with you my thoughts on this and give you my tips and suggestions for how to navigate this in a way which is hopefully far less painful and far less nerve-wracking for you as a business owner. The first thing I want to say, first and foremost, is you're not alone. This is all business owners at some time or other on the business journey. Getting clarity around wanting to work with more aligned clients is fabulous. It's part of growth. It's part of up-leveling. As the business evolves and grows, the service offerings will evolve and grow, and the clients that you will best be able to serve in your business will change. So again, evolve and grow. That's all part of the process that's supposed to happen. So that's the first thing I want to say. It's not just you. There's nothing wrong with you. You haven't done anything wrong. And it's not about, when you look back, it's not about taking on clients that perhaps weren't a good fit. It's not that. Sure, that happens sometimes, but that's not the topic of this podcast episode. That's not what I wanted to focus on. I want to focus on normalizing growth and normalizing that discomfort around the clients that you do have on the books or the work you do have in your workflow. Sometimes it's no longer a good fit. To that I say, it's like ripping a Band-Aid in my mind, and this is the way I approach these conversations with my clients often. It's like ripping a Band-Aid. So the quicker the better. The sooner the better, because then you've got less time to think about it and agonize over it, and then the quicker the better. So we all know that, whether it's from our own childhood or whether that's what we do with our own kids. It's really not that big a deal. We make it a big deal by thinking about it so much, and we blow it out of proportion. And that is, yes, absolutely something that happens around this topic of letting a client go. So you can call it whatever you want. Terminating somebody, cutting them loose, moving on, letting them go, however you want to frame it, however it sits for you, the process is the same. How do you part ways with a client that you have who is no longer aligned so that you can make way or make space for more beautifully aligned clients that you know you can better serve? Here we go. The first thing I recommend you do is take a look at your client service agreement. So whether you call it your design agreement or your coaching agreement or your business T's and C's, whatever the agreement you have or the terms and conditions you have in place for working with your client, start there. What does it say in relation to termination? What is your exit strategy? Now, if we've worked together, there will be a very clear exit strategy in there, applicable for both parties. If we haven't, you may have to just dig a little deeper because it may not be quite as clear and as obvious. But the first thing to do is have a look at that agreement and see what it says around the right to exit, so the right to terminate. This is developing your exit strategy. Once you know contractually what it is you must do in order to be able to part ways with your client, you can then plan out what that looks like. So your client service agreement or your business T's and C's ought to have a process in there for how you part ways, what notice you have to give, who's responsible for the costs. And usually for a service-based business, this ought to say something along the lines of, if you want to terminate for reasons other than a breach, you've got to give a set number of days or months notice, and the client has an obligation to pay you as the service provider for everything you do up until the date of termination. So I encourage you to get crystal clear on what your contract or your agreement with your client says around terminating so you can start planning your exit strategy. Once you know that, you can then consider any key dates or obligations that come into play. Depending on the nature of your business and the service you're providing, there may be some key filing dates, whether they're legal or if we're talking BAS, accounting, or if you're an interior designer and you've got a completion date to work to, if there are other trades or contractors that are reliant on the work you're doing. Same with graphical web design. Is there a launch date? Just get really clear on the dates that are important to the project and the dates that are important to the client. What we don't want to do is leave the client in the lurch. Absolutely don't want to do that, both from a legal perspective and a business perspective. We don't want reputational risk arising out of this or reputational harm. And legally, if we've contracted to do certain things, we need to understand what our obligations are, because there may be damage that flows if we fail to deliver. So get crystal clear on the dates and obligations. And then this feeds into your exit strategy, because you'll be able to work out how much notice you need to give, and you'll be able to see whether that aligns with any key dates so that you can work out when to give the notice to make sure you can deliver contractually what you need to deliver. If anything, sometimes there's nothing, but if there is, make sure that's factored into your planning. The next thing to consider is the need for a handover. If it is the case that your client is likely going to bring in somebody else, you need to think about what it is that's going to need to be handed over. Some things the client will be able to hand over, some things you'll need to do. Does your contract say anything about a handover? Important to understand that. And then from a professional and business perspective, what do you need to do to prepare for that handover? Again, we don't want to be leaving the client in the lurch. So there's a lot of considerations here, but planning for the handover is really important when you're developing your exit strategy, because then you know the work you need to do that will lead up to that date of termination. Once you have clarity on those things, you've got timeframes mapped out. You know what work still needs to be done, if any. You've planned your handover, again, if any. You can then give the notice to the client, because whilst you'll be letting the client know that you're going to part ways, and as I always say, this is a wonderful opportunity for the business owner and for the client, because if the business owner doesn't feel aligned in providing the service, then chances are the client feels that too. And the client would be better served by somebody who is more aligned for them, who can better serve them. So it's a win-win. I'm the queen of reframe, and I love doing that. I love reframing it and putting a positive on it. And so that's how I reframe parting of ways. But you can then get ready to give notice to the client, to let them know that you're going to terminate. You can give an explanation if you wish. Sometimes you don't need to. That needs to be nuanced on a case-by-case basis. And you can let the client know, this is the notice period I have to give you. Notice period takes effect from now. Termination date will be this. This is the work left to be done. You can particularize what you'll do, what you won't do, what will be left. You can then talk about a handover, whether that's going to be needed, ask for a time frame so that you can make that process really seamless. So even though this client relationship hasn't completed the way your more aligned client relationships would, you can still offboard in a really professional way. You can still offboard in a way that's on brand for you. It doesn't need to be sour. It doesn't need to be awful. It just doesn't. And you have the ability to direct this process by spending the time to plan. By spending the time to plan your exit strategy, you can direct the process so that it stays professional and it stays on brand for you. Once you have done that, you've planned your exit strategy, you've thought about the things I've discussed, and you've let the client know, follow through is key. Follow through is absolutely key to make sure you do what you say you were going to do as and when you say you were going to do it, particularly if key dates were involved in your notice of termination to the client. Then you need to make sure you're following through. The client needs to feel supported all the way to the end, even if you're terminating early, even if. It doesn't matter. You still need to follow through and support the client all the way to the end because, again, we're managing your legal obligations under the client service agreement or the terms and conditions, but we're managing your brand and your professionalism by making sure you're parting ways in a beautifully aligned way for your business. I hear too many stories about how things have gone sour with a client and someone's gone, right, that's it. It's like throwing the toys out of the pram going, I'm not playing with you anymore. It doesn't need to be like that. And we're all adults. It shouldn't be like that. That's all I have to say on that. I will spend no more time pressing that point, but it shouldn't be like that. That doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean it's not uncomfortable. Yes, it can be challenging and it can be uncomfortable, but it doesn't have to be a dummy spit either. So there we have it. These are my tips and my guidance to you on what to focus on when developing your exit strategy to part ways with your client. So I've talked about the importance of planning to develop that exit strategy. Take a look at your client agreements, your terms and conditions, and have a look what it says around timeframes, giving notice, and how you give that notice. Is it email? Is it letter? Is it phone? What is it? Then we look at key dates and obligations. Make sure you're not leaving the client vulnerable. We don't want to leave clients in the lurch. So what will you deliver on? What won't you deliver on? And prepare details of that for the client so that they know. Think about a handover. If a handover is going to be important, prepare for that. Make sure you do a beautifully aligned handover, which is on brand and professional. Then give the notice to the client. You've spent time planning. You're clear on how this is going to unfold. You can now give notice to the client in accordance with the agreement or the contract, and you can then enter into discussions, if required, with the client to affect the handover or to bring things up to speed up to and including the termination date. Make sure you're clear on what you get paid for, and again, comes back to the client contract, and make sure you issue an invoice in a timely manner in relation to what's owed to you as at that termination date. And that's the follow through. So if you do that well, like I said a moment ago, just because you're offboarding somebody in a way that you hadn't intended because you're terminating early, and you're terminating to do the client a service so that they can be served by somebody better aligned for them, which means it's a win-win. It's a positive for both. Absolutely. I don't think anybody's well served by somebody who doesn't want to work with them, who isn't feeling aligned, who is feeling resentful, or who just isn't enjoying it. No one is served in those circumstances. So it really is a win-win, and it doesn't have to be bitter and sour. It doesn't have to be that dummy spit or throwing the toys out of the pram. It can be really professional, really smooth, and then everybody feels better once the cord's cut and you're both free to move on your own paths to work with clients or service providers that are beautifully aligned. I know these conversations can be awkward. I know these conversations can be tricky. And I also know sometimes you need support. So if it's support from someone like me that you need, please feel free to reach out. I say it on here so often, we don't need to be doing this alone. And who we surround ourselves with in business really matters. And this is a classic example of one of those times where it really matters. So if you do need guidance or if you do need support or advice in a situation like this, please don't hesitate to reach out, and you can book in for a complimentary chat via the website. The link's in the show notes. That's what I wanted to share with you today. It comes up a lot. Now is the perfect time of year to be thinking about it, because if there are clients that you need to part ways with, now's the time so that you can open space to support clients who are really beautifully aligned, and that is a win-win. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you've gotten some little nuggets of gold out of this episode. If you have a business friend or a colleague that you think would benefit from this too, I'd be so grateful if you would share this, because that is how we get the podcast into the ears of even more business owners. As always, thanks for joining me. I'll catch you next time.